Hi everyone, I'm Sissy, and today we're going to talk about an issue that is going on right now in the news. As you may have heard, President Obama recently had a State of the Union address. In his address, he talked about America and Cuba and some talks that were being negotiated at the time. America has tried several times to isolate Cuba in hopes to bring Cuba in for talks and negotiation, but Cuba refused to budge. So after those failed attempts, we have now reached out to talk to Cuba without trying to isolate them. Have you ever held a grudge? I bet you have never held a grudge as long as Cuba and America has held a grudge. There has been some history with Cuba and America. In 1961, America cut ties with Cuba after President Castro, a communist who has communist tendencies, came into office. Castro, just to give a little bit of history of Castro, he seized private land. He naturalized hundreds of private companies. Those included U.S. corporations. He taxed American products coming into his country very heavily, which caused Cuba to suffer tremendously. He just seemed not to care about his people and did not care how they suffered as he cut ties with America. They did reach out to one person, the Soviet Union, known as Russia. They became partners, so to say, with Cuba. Cuba and Russia did. Russia even built missile bases in Cuba, and Cuba allowed them to do so. Eventually, that was stopped by America, and they said they had to take them out. So, another issue, Castro also sent 125,000 people from Cuba to America because they did not agree with how Cuba was going. So that is some of the rough history just with Castro after he came into office. And that's kind of the reason we parted ways with Cuba to begin with. There's also some advantages. There's always advantages, right? Cuba, they have economically suffered since 1961. They still drive cars as old as the 1950s. They call them jalopies. I mean, they upkeep them, they keep them running, but there is no economic growth. Cell phone markets, very limited. They are very expensive. People that live there cannot afford to pay for cell phone service, telephone service. There are a lot of restrictions. They can't travel. People from America can't travel in. So there is just a lot of issues between America and Cuba, all since Castro took office. I guess you could see Castro as kind of a hardhead. So some of the advantages, of course, some of the political prisoners will be released. They're between Cuba. We have some of Cuba's prisoners, and they have some of ours. So they would be released, and they would be able to return home. And they would also end short-term detentions. Settlements of property claims. There were so many property claims that were left unsettled because of the taxes. So those would now be settled. The return of fugitives. We in the United States have had so many people that have run to Cuba because of the laws. So they run there, they hide, and they're never sent back for justice. So now they will be sent back to face charges. It would expand travel, trade, and financial activity. Like I said before, Cuba has suffered tremendously because economic growth has not been as it is in America. Without those ties, they have not been able to grow on their own. The exports of goods would return. That's both directions. Stuff from the United States would be sent there. Stuff from Cuba would be sent here to sell. A big issue I noticed was the Cuban cigars. They're saying the market price on those could really, really increase now that we would be trading again with Cuba. And a good other thing that would be avoided, we would no longer have a mediator. I bet most of you do not realize that Switzerland played mediator between America and Cuba. So they were kind of the middle person. They were there to mediate anything we had and anything Cuba had. as a middle person. Nobody ever wants to go through a middle person. Things get changed, words get misconstrued. It's just a mess. So, of course, speaking of change, there's risk. What are the risks? What risk are we taking by rekindling our ties with Cuba? What risk are they taking? Are there risks? I believe there are risks. Cuba have always been partners with who? Russia, the Soviet Union. Are they still partners? Are they pulling us in by using Cuba as a leverage to get information? Maybe, maybe not. Who's to say? They may not have ties with Russia anymore. We cannot say if they do or not. We can just only speculate. So the second risk would be who's still sitting in power in Cuba? Castro himself. What's the change? Why does he want to change? It's been this many years. 1961 is when we cut ties. So why now? Why now does he want to change? Who can know? Is he just older and wiser? Or there is somebody asking him, as in, we don't know. We can only speculate again. And the third risk would be things just go back the way they were once. They see that the tie together is not going to, work out. They would just go back together. Because in the long run, the United States still plans to press on issues of democracy and human rights. And they are going to press Castro to follow the same rules they wanted him to follow before. Is he going to? What happens if he doesn't? I guess time will tell as things begin to straighten itself out and work its way out. Time will tell. So that was my speech, my issue speech about what's going on in the world today. I hope you enjoyed it. I tried to make it interesting. I hope I did so. I hope you guys all have a great weekend that's upcoming. Thank you.